Thank you very much. I want to repeat the welcome that Celeste gave. Thank you all for coming. And especially thank you for Tim for coming all this way to the end of the world to talk to us about design. As Celeste says, Tim is the director of the Design Museum in London and has been for 6 years. And in his capacity as director of Design Museum, I think Tim has really used the opportunity to test the dimensions of design. Design not only in the way that we conventionally see it as objects and things, but also in terms of film, in terms of fashion, and technology and innovation. So clearly this is an interesting subject that I want to talk to Tim about. Tim has a very good track record as a broadcaster and as an interviewer, and he's interviewed me many times. So it's a nice opportunity to get to turn the table and tonight he will be the subject. But I do want to introduce very briefly some of the themes. Clearly, the issues the issues that we want to deal with in this exhibition, what we've tried to touch on, is what is design now? All of us in the design profession have had to reconsider our focus given our current anxieties about environment in terms of how we make things, why we make them, the effect of consumerism, and in terms of community and purpose. I just want to give, this is a slightly brief, well, I try to make it a brief overview from my perspective about design in the Galician context. This is a rather beautiful tool. Can we maybe turn the lights down a tiny bit? Those of us that are a bit romantic about design continuously return to the sort of honest objects that had great functional requirements. We always somehow see something extremely honest and beautiful at the same time in these objects. This is clearly a sort of romantic projection as well. There's no doubt about that. And you could argue that these are objects of much more innocence and where is design. But in a way, every time we make something, we design. And there's something very interesting about how making protects designing in a way. If you make something well, there is inevitably design decisions. I have I have many weaknesses, but one of my weaknesses is to collect bowls, ceramic bowls. And I started this many, many years ago in Japan and Korea and China, when such objects were not so expensive and were sort of affordable. But the reason I collect bowls is because they contain within them this utilitarian component. So on the one hand, they are the universal object. Every culture has a bowl. And the bowl is defined by its use in some way. But every bowl is also, or most bowls, have a beauty in the way they're made. And in the making, they have a beauty, they have aesthetic. And so within one object, you have a universal understanding of, in a way I would say it's probably the most universal object. And this appeals to me enormously as a sort of design object. Within the history of design, and in our country, in the UK, there was a very strong movement in the 19th century, late 19th century, the arts and craft movement, which was a revolt against industrialization. So we understood in the 19th century that industrialization will isolate making. And so you had romantics like William Morris and Pugin and people like this, who were interested in a way, trying to stop time to some degree, of romanticizing and emphasizing the importance of craftsmanship. So it became the arts and crafts movement, and this was a very important moment, and somehow this is still philosophically stuck in our minds. Counter to that, when we get to the beginning of the 20th century, we had the Bauhaus, and we had the opposite happening, or at least, I suppose, a sort of continuation, but a much different position, which was, instead of refusing industrialization, embracing industrialization and enjoying industrialization as a way of bringing beauty to many. So this is Wagenfeld making beautiful glass containers. He was a student at the Bauhaus and went on to become an extremely important designer. And in a way, this was the romantic idea of modernism, which was to say industry engaged with design can produce beauty, actually also for the most people at the lowest price. We know that in a way that tendency became consumed into consumerism, and design became not just like these, which was to do with creating the most beautiful objects for the lowest price for the most people. We then had design becoming part of the way of selling things, and that was, and we know that if I make again a sort of rather dystopian and exaggerated statement, of course, we know that we're producing too much, we're making too much, we're consuming too much, and we're producing waste from these things. So we are, all of us as designers and makers are guilty of this in some way. And of course, design has become embedded in consumerism, in the commodification of our world and the leveraging of price. So instead of a cheap pair of glasses, the same pair of glasses are much more expensive because they are design glasses. So we get a very strange position that design has gone from something about honesty to something which is not about honesty. Bringing this back to Galicia, this is an image I think everyone that's been hanging around here knows, the Sargadelos, which I think is a very interesting moment in Galician manufacture and culture. A company that absolutely thought about how to make things with a certain amount of beauty, why, that within addressing a sort of cultural context, and actually having a very strong design aesthetic position. I mean, in a way, I would say it was a very great moment of these forces coming together in a good way. And on the same note, I would say, in my opinion, and I don't know what two things are, there's clearly a moment in Italy after the war, in the 1950s and 1960s. This is Gio Ponti, my hero, where post-war Italy used design, I think, in a very genuine way to put back the pieces after the war, in using design in a way of recreating beauty, recreating meaning, and recreating skills. Just very finally, this is a eulogy. I edited Domus for a while, and Jasper Morrison, who's a good friend and someone that and you know from design, he wrote an article each month for me, and this was an article he wrote about the Tonne 14, one of the most extraordinary objects ever designed. It was in production, continuous production for 160 years. It became the closest thing to a sort of universal object, and it was about how to make something, bending wood, and originated in Vienna in the 1840s. You could buy them in Argentina, you could buy them in Moscow, and it was, in some sense, a sort of an extraordinary example of, let's say, good design applied to industrial scale. And that's where I just want to leave it. This is a sort of introduction just to sort of talk about and thinking about the relationship between making things and designing things. And within the, I would say, in the context of Galicia, thinking a bit about where design sits. And partly I'm concerned that the word design has become sort of meaningless in a way, because if we talk about designer jeans or designer glasses or designer anything, what does it mean? It just means somehow desirable or thought about. I think it's clearly a time when the design community is looking beyond the design of sofas and furniture. But Tim, in the last 6 years, where you've been hunting around and looking at what's going on, what are the positive things you've seen, or where do you see design? I mean, is my romantic idea of the Tonne chair a dead idea because we don't want universal objects anymore, and actually objects are? Is design more about technology? Where are we in terms of the design focus? I'm
going to stand up because this is beautiful, beautifully designed, but actually no one at the back can see who we are, so just hello. And then we're going to... I think design's always been involved with technology. I think design is the application of certain principles of formation with the technology that's possible. So there's a symbiotic relationship clearly between design and technology. I gave up after about 1.5 years trying to define what design was in any meaningful way, realizing that having been in the art world, trying to define what art was interesting for certain creative people, but in a museum context, virtually pointless. I was just interested, though, in where design met other areas. And I came up with the idea that design was fundamentally about problem solving, but it can be other things too. But even in fashion, because someone raised the issue and I made that point, well, what problems are being solved in fashion? Well, actually, how we adorn our bodies, how we present ourselves, it's still a problem of sorts that is resolved through design. But what was interesting to me was that the art world where I came from preached the language of inclusivity and boundary blurring and was always positiving itself as open to everything. But it turns out that the art world is quite territorial. It doesn't like designers becoming artists. It doesn't like architects becoming artists. It doesn't mind artists co-opting, appropriating across the boundaries. It doesn't like it the other way. Which is just an observation. It's kind of meaningless because individual people, you talk about the design community, David, and I think, for the purposes of this talk and for the purposes of humanity, there has to be some sense of community on occasion amongst creative people. But fundamentally, individual creative people respond to things in their own way, and designers don't work collectively as designers, but design is a much more collective activity than art, and that design by definition is collaborative, and that most people, unless they're of the outsider tradition, don't design airports in their bedrooms. It has to be something that is is commissioned. It has something that is funded. It has to be something that is a collective activity fundamentally. And that was interesting to me. But the other thing was that design was a great way of looking at the world in order to draw attention to people, that it's a way of seeing how things are put together, how things are made. So at the museum, of course, we do more pure design exhibitions of contemporary designers and the stuff that they design. But we also use design as a framework to look at film. We did a history of football over the last 150 years through the lens of design, from technology to balls to pitches to the mediation of tournaments to the graphic designs to the notion of play. It was a really great way of looking at something like that. So design affords all those different ways. But I think the thing that gives me cause for optimism is actually fundamentally the problem as well, which is that the best designers acknowledged their complicity over the years in mass production and fueling mass consumption. And there's a realization that good design is our way out of the screwed up relationship that we have with our planet. It is a kind of big picture idea. But what also interests me in design is using it as a way of looking at things in a different perspective. And although it's slightly offbeat, this just looks like a tapestry, which is a tapestry, of beautiful flowers. It looks decorative. What it is actually, though, is something that's produced from an algorithm that takes a particular place. We could do it in the garden out here. We did it in a garden in Kensington. It's been done in a park in London as well, where the algorithms are fed with soil conditions, climate, and the algorithm then comes up with the best kind of plantation for pollinators in that context. So this is a pollinator's view of what the best planting would be for bees, for example. So then if you go on the next slide, have I got the control? You've got the control. This is the beginnings of the garden, and the next one. We did it with children. We got and the next slide. So that these children in a local school. This is Daisy Ginsberg, who's the designer who produces the algorithms, who produces the tapestry that's on show in the Design Museum, that gives a different perspective that then is enacted by you or a group of school children or a public park or a landscape gardener in order to plant the best thing. And it's that shift in perspective from human-centric design that excites me most at the moment, and trying to see things from the perspective of other species that gives us the best opportunity to shift the way that we are designing with the planet and for the planet, rather than just for human need or efficacy. Now, that is a romantic idea as well, because actually human beings fundamentally are survivalists, are selfish genetic constructions. But this shift is interesting. And there's just the next one slide. Where it all began, actually, for me, was this. And these are sort of tiny sculptural creations that look like some kind of post-surrealist humanoid figures with these kind of oddities. But actually, this is by a design practice called Dunn and Raby, speculative design pioneers. And each of these different constructions actually is based on biological analysis of how different species see human beings. So some see us as a pheromone trail, others see us as a ball of, or perceive us, see is the wrong thing because it's the five senses. Others perceive us as a kind of a ball of activity, a ball of energy. Others smell us. And actually this was a kind of manifesto piece in thinking about seeing it from a different perspective. And then we started to look and work with designers and commission designers who were working from the standpoint of looking at it from different perspectives. So that's the exciting part of where we're at. The interesting thing is that you've talked about good design. This interests me as well. We have a big wall at the Design Museum, which is crowdsourced, which is the most popular design, the things that people think are examples of good design. And the designer, in inverted commas, label is very low on that. There's plastic buckets, there's bikes, there's shoes, there is the Philippe Starck lemon squeezer, which could be brilliant design or shit design, depending on which way you are. But there's a great range of things. And I actually thought, having inherited this, that we could do a wall of bad design. And everyone got really excited about it. And I have to say, I chickened out because I don't think it's fair in a museum that is trying to explore, work with, collaborate with designers to have a kind of wall of shame based on public taste saying, actually, we think your designs are terrible. But it's not a bad idea, actually, to be able to go public on that. And just finally, I had this brilliant letter about 3 years ago. Sadly, it was scrawled, the signature. There was no phone number, no email, no address, and I couldn't read who it was. But being stereotypical, it was in green ink and slightly wavery. So I reckoned probably a woman in her 80s, but that's just a guess based on my grandmother's missives to me. And she just wrote to me very calmly. She said, "Dear Mr. Marlow, I am writing to you to complain about the design of tin openers. I've had 3 in the last 3 years, and I've been hospitalized once. One cannot function, and the other is whatever. And while you're at it, parking wardens," and then she went off about the British obsession with parking, which slightly, I think it showed that she was probably, it was catharsis more than anything. I thought this was brilliant, that the director of the Design Museum was the only place she felt she could write to complain about bad design. Sadly, though, she didn't give me the opportunity. I was going to sort of write back and ask for more details and then see, I thought we could have a competition amongst young designers in design schools to come up with the best tin opener for this woman, which would be a brilliant case study. Anyway, I couldn't do that. But I quite like that idea. That, and so where do we go with our complaints about bad design? Well, the market says that the products fail. And where do we go to with our approval for good design? Well, it's how we use it. And it's invariably market-driven, but it would be wonderful to try and have some kind of sense of collaboration in evolving and making better designs, which brings us to your area of practice, which is placemaking. And that is an area which is now more and more publicly demanded that we collaborate, that we consult. But we don't tend to consult on the stuff we make. People just buy it or they don't, or they hospitalize themselves or they don't.
Because it's the market that delivers that.
Yeah.
And the only way we can influence the market is by not buying. And that's our feedback.
Yeah.
The only other feedback is to write to you.
Exactly. Although by the same token, I can, if I am responsible for all bad design, which I'm happy to do, I'm also responsible for all good design. So I can take a huge amount of credit. Yeah.
On that. If we see, design as innovation, and if we take me as a typical romantic designer of a certain period, like Jasper, I love these objects, these sort of the timeless object, the tonne chair or whatever, and of course, the timeless object hardly exists anymore. I guess for 2 reasons: because the world that we live in produces a different type of object. I mean, mostly, we buy a new one of these every few years, and there's a sort of built-in redundancy in these things. And secondly, the market which is delivering us things needs to keep supplying. So the idea of creating the chair that you will have for the rest of your life is a little bit counter-market, because actually they want you to buy a chair and then they want you to buy another chair next year. So how do we reconcile these different ideas of design, which is to some degree, even if you take the tools, that I showed in the beginning, these are objects which have somehow perfected themselves within their own terms of reference. There's something incredibly intelligent about them. So they carry skills and crafts and intelligence. If we've surrendered that process to a consumerist or commodified market, how do we regain the control of the tin opener, or how do we regain this sense? Because you're saying that it might be possible in placemaking, let's say, because all of a sudden you could get a room of people coming together and expressing that.
Well, I think, I mean, the postmodern condition about taking from the past what is seems to be most useful or productive or exciting, it does afford a kind of liberalism. There's a freedom implicit in that, but as well as a confusion of sort of not a culture of nostalgia or anything goes. And I think that more and more people are looking to relearning some of the lessons of the past. So we did a workshop recently about fixing stuff, and it was absolutely inundated. We had queues around the block. We could keep doing it. And I think that idea about repair shop mentality, that people bring things that have broken and we get them fixed, is definitely an area where control can be regained. What's interesting is the luxury market can be hijacked in some ways to counter the whole notion of mass consumption or feeding appetite for more and buying more and more and more. Because if you take the Patek Philippe thing about, you just own it for your lifetime and then you pass it on, and the idea that jewelry or watches actually are made to design for decades or centuries, then the idea of actually producing things that are built to last and that can be handed down, I think is something that we should be pushing more. Although I heard ridiculously, I mean, I shouldn't probably name the fashion house, but it might have been Hermes. Somebody sitting on a panel in the Middle East recently, a couple of years ago, and was talking about their particular brand, and then said, but the thing about us is that we're not a luxury brand, we're for everyone. And I thought, well, that's absolute nonsense. But what you should have said is, although we're perceived as a luxury brand, what we produce lives through decades and generations, and it's sustainable in a sense that it will have a long lifetime. And it's the craftsmanship and the production and the materials that makes it so sustainable. It was that angle, but this idea that somehow it's for everyone was kind of nonsense. And we did an exhibition not so long ago called More Than Human, which was looking at this non-human centric design. And what was interesting was you and I wandering around the Museo del Pogo de Galicia, the Galician people this afternoon. There were so many things in that museum and just up the way that were very similar to the objects that were in More Than Human. So, for example, mass fishing and the kind of dredging and the huge plastic nets that span a mile that need to be stopped, that are decimating the oceans. Some of the solutions that research units are coming up with actually look very similar to the kind of wicker baskets and the wicker netting that small communities use very sustainably. So I think there's this idea that there is much we can learn from the past, but
but this is, let me interrupt you there. The fishermen who are actually fishing don't want to use those things anymore because they're inefficient. The people who like them are students of architecture at Harvard University and things like that, who are regaining this idea of, a tangible and repairable society. So how do we realign this? And you use the word repair, and it does seem, when I grew up a long time ago, I'm still growing up, but everything new was exciting and everything new was better. And we have now got to a strange moment where we have lost that commitment, that innovation for its own sake. We're suspicious of it. And I think we should be suspicious of it, because to some degree, I mean, certainly in architecture even, we're looking more at the idea of repairing than we are of exploiting. We can't extract ink without consideration anymore. We know that every time we build, we have to rethink about that. And I think this is changing our mind enormously. I mean, everyone got very excited about the rocket going to Mars. Yeah, we're not going, part of our Mars mission. And Evelyn said, haven't we got enough things to work out here? Isn't there enough to try and fix on our own planet than start to go and mess up another one. And it does feel like we aren't taking the simple things more seriously. And that's why I somehow still like the idea of the physical, that I don't believe that only nostalgic romantics like me still like a beautiful old chair or something. And we all still like objects, and we still, I think, we would like to treasure things more. Your story of repairing, you know.
But it's how do we change it? Education, and I think there are generations a lot younger than we who now feel fundamentally that the climate emergency is the most important thing in the world, and we could take the cynical view that eventually, when they reach the point where they have to, earn living, support families, that they become cynical again. I'm not so sure. I think there's a kind of change through education. And I think there's a generation emerging now that will hopefully assume power in the next 2 decades in the world, who understand totally the mess that we are in and will be in even more if we don't mediate that. And so that's to do with education and then taste. And the taste is interesting because again it goes from modernism put forward the idea, didn't it, that newness and originality and endless recycling, the kind of model of the avant-garde, was the way that culture and production and creativity had to be. Now there's a much more kind of nuanced or measured approach to that. But the other thing is to do with money. If you quite rightly point out that the fishermen, it's an economic thing. There was a scheme involved with a marine charity I was involved in a little in the UK, where there was a natural harbour off the south coast of England in Dorset, that had been, the oyster beds had been there for centuries, and they were completely wrecked from dredging. And so the fishing community, the fishermen there were paid a certain subsidy through this marine charity. And over 2 years, just 2 years, oyster beds were replanted. And within 5 years, the ocean bed and the ocean there, the fish and they could see the recovery. And because one of the problems about the ocean is, unlike the landscape, is you can't see the damage. So, it's out of sight, out of mind. And then they started to see, they needed some subsidy, no one's checked, but actually it was a much more fertile area for them to fish once things had been renewed.
But someone has to intervene.
Yeah.
And it's not a commercial intervention. It may have commercial long-term benefits, and it may make commercial sense. But who is the agency who is going to do that? And that seems to be the problem. If you take another example, housing, we all know that we should be producing housing that people can afford. In a way, we should be producing everything that people could afford. I mean, we are now getting to a general affordability crisis. So why are we having an affordability crisis? Because everything is leveraged, because our whole economy is about making more money from something. So you don't make something without making money from it. So there has to be reward. So if you take the Bauhaus example, where the Bauhaus was trying to say, we believe you can apply design to industry, and this will give us the opportunity to make the most beautiful objects for the lowest possible price for the most people. I mean, that's the beautiful dream, because industry and technology will allow you to do it. But what they forgot was that the commercial motivation behind that is not going to allow you to do that. In the same way, if you wanted to build low-cost housing and you wanted to finance that through investors, it's very difficult to say to the investors, I want to build the best possible housing for the lowest price for the most people. Because the investors, and where do you get the money? Who makes the money? So unless we intervene in this commercial mechanism, all we're going to do is keep putting prices up. Every time we sell something, we have to make more money from it. You make a cup of coffee, you've got to make a huge amount of profit on it. I mean, we are in the land here where you're not allowed to do that, which I think is something I like a lot. You know, if you go to London, a coffee can be
£7 in the design museum.
£7, €10.
Funding a charity.
Try to do that in Galicia, so I think there's something, in my opinion, and this is a silly anecdote in a way, but unless you can put a sort of social break on what's acceptable, and unless we can find other methods by which we can produce high quality without it only being for a luxury market, because that's, in a way, that's where quality is migrating. And the other danger is, if we're not careful, we will keep products affordable, but only by reducing quality. And so that's my sort of anxiety about, it's one thing to observe and be more cognizant of these issues and articulate them better. But unless we really grapple with the machinery, the agencies, and the market which delivers these things, it's quite difficult for us to make a significant change.
Well, it is, and you and I can't fix late free market capitalism. We can do something through education, which shifts perceptions and tastes. But it's funny you should say that. If you just move to the next slide, one of the things that design can do to help resolve, and it's small scale, but this is the whole issue around environmentalism, isn't it? I mean, which is why recycling our stuff, when Trump's America is reneging on all contractual obligations in that. We still got to keep doing it. We still have to keep small incrementalism, and design can actually move to the next one. I'll do that later. But so design research is the key area, and the best design companies and the best companies spend a huge amount of money on design research. But at times of economic downturn, at times of hardship, research and development is always the thing that goes out the window. So actually, there can be some public-spirited design opportunities that could be for everyone. So this is something that the Design Museum has done. We have this unit called Future Observatory. We are now the National Centre for Design Research for the Green Transition. We get funding from research councils in the UK, which we don't have ourselves. We distribute it to different postgraduate departments as a network around the United Kingdom with certain projects that they have pitched ideas to us, and then we fund these. And a lot of it's big thinking. So how do we get rid of all single-use plastic in the Scottish National Health Service? That's something that Strathclyde University Postgraduate Design Department are now working on. Now, the problem with that is it might take them 5 years. They may actually crack it, or they may come up with a brilliant academic solution of 3 options, which you can choose, but it becomes more speculative. So that's important, that we think big, and we think, there's another funded project about Rathven Island off the coast of Northern Ireland. So there's a kind of whole cultural infrastructure there. So it's how we can, the most sustainable way of getting rid of effluent and human waste and recycle waste within a community. So this could become a blueprint for the future. But much more concretely, excuse the pun, because no concrete's involved, we've just produced this stone, but the Future Observatory commissioned group work. You probably know Amin Tahar is an architect whose practice in London works in stone. And Amin Tahar and Arup and the research department at University College have come up with this. Is called a stone demonstrator. And it's the 3-story one-to-one scaled model, which is used entirely of its stone. There are steel tendons. It's pre-tensiled compressed stone that makes the structure, and actually the self-supporting stone bricks on the outside. There's a laminated timber roof. There are kind of wooden joists as well as a stone structure there. And the point about this is, as a basic technological model, it reduces the carbon footprint of a steel frame by 70%. And if you use traditional London bricks, and concrete combinations, it reduces it by 90%. Now, the point about this is it's been constructed and it's there for industry to take. We don't want ownership of it. We mind some IP down the line for future projects, but we're trying to get the government housing ministry to look at this and say, I mean, it's also economically, it's as economic as any other form of construction, cheaper than some, no more expensive than others. But the carbon footprint is so much lower. And we're saying, but no one's taking, at the moment, you have to get through various government levels of bureaucracy and saying, there's a housing crisis in the UK. You want to build much more housing, use this as the basis. You can, architects can use this structure and design a whole range of different kind of housing solutions. So just this as a small idea, if design research is commissioned and put into the public domain for broader use, I mean, developers are actually quite interested in this, but we also showcased an all wooden building about 3 years ago, the construction components of that. And the problem with that is, although it's incredibly sustainable and fire-treated laminated timber is unburnable, because of the tragedies of Grenfell Tower, if you know about that, but anyway, a major public housing complex that burnt down and hundreds of people lost their lives, the algorithms of insurance companies won't insure a wooden building over 10 stories, even though it's perfectly safe. So that now can't go into the public domain. It can only be private developers because it can't go into the public domain. This can. The key is, how do you sell it? How do you say to people, look, just take it. Here's the technology. We'll show you, you can download the whole issue. You can speak to the architects. You can speak to the engineers. Build it. And in fact, if you build it, it's great for us. We'll keep promoting it and more people can do it. Now, it hasn't taken off yet. It's only been up about 3 months, and English winter doesn't necessarily encourage people to come and look at a model of this scale. But this kind of initiative, I think, it's one of the few ways that museums can set agendas. Museums always talk about setting agendas. Museums don't. They tend to reflect the agenda in various areas, showcase it, take it to broader audiences, and it's much better if they're honest about that. But if you're working in design research, you can. And obviously our role as a museum is to leverage funding, is to commission design practices and design research departments to look into these problems and then make it publicly available. And that's one model, that's one way of doing it.
But the challenge is to get that accepted by industry.
Yeah, and government. I mean, if government, the housing ministry showed interest, then got sacked or stepped down, so we now have to wait for the next one. But if somebody at that level said, right, there's going to be a national building initiative, which we need to do, and we're going to use this model for sustainable building, that would be a major breakthrough.
Isn't that the reality, that without political direction, these things they can be ideas, they can be researched, companies can be interested, but unless they are encouraged financially and administrations and governments take responsibility for pushing that. Without that, it's very difficult to join these things up.
It is, but individuals are increasingly conscious of their carbon footprint and are demanding products, buildings, public spaces that can show environmental consideration.
But we've noticed a big reluctance in the building industry to actually appropriate them.
Sure, and the building industry is responsible for 40% of global carbon emissions. 11% of that is new buildings.
Yeah, but it's very difficult on a one-by-one basis to convince an investor to take this on the basis that it's better for the planet, even though it might be not so good for his pocket.
Yeah, except that developers or clients who are commissioning museums or airports or whatever it may be, they want buildings that also proclaim their enlightened status. They want buildings that are landmarks or monuments to them as well. And actually, the increasing push that you can claim virtue by commissioning a major sustainable building as well as something that looks like Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Bilbao, it is possible. There is a kind of shift in that way.
I agree there's a shift, but I'm still nervous that without really strong encouragement and carrots and sticks, then it's very difficult. We're doing a building in London for the London School of Economics, a very enlightened client, and we are reusing a building. And even with an enlightened client that wants virtue from it, I would say, if we went back to the beginning, they would say we wouldn't do it again. It's a lot of work because it's more difficult than what you've done before. And the industry knows how to price what you've done before, and it knows how to de-risk, because what industry doesn't like is risk, and they don't like pricing that in. I'm as optimistic as you are that it can be done. I'm just a bit more concerned that all we need is the encouragement. The house building sector in Britain is not going to solve the problems on its own without government intervention.
It isn't, but it's much easier to leverage government intervention or the support or the commissioning by developers if we've got prototypes and examples. And that's the point. So,
100%.
So the question about what can design do is to keep designing better and more responsibly and more sustainably, and I suppose you say more imaginatively, and give people the option of things, and then they've got at least the chance of making the right choice.
That's all most of us can do, is to show examples and to make examples happen, and then try to promote examples. But we do need. Shall I ask for questions now? Sure. We've got 15 minutes for. So, please, any questions? We have a microphone there. Please say who you are and then.
Hello, good evening. My name is Ismael. I'm an industrial designer. And I was eagerly listening to this conversation, thinking, well, many different things, but what comes back to me every time during this kind of conversation about behavioral shifts and mentality shifts is the huge role that institutions or agents of awareness raising, if I may, can play. Because, I don't know, I can think of a few examples in which I've seen this shift happen. I think the other day during the conversation with Henry, the Danish designer who was here, he said, oh, in Denmark it's quite common to save up for 20 years to pay for a good piece of design. And a lot of people here were kind of shocked about that, because nobody would do that here. But then I thought, well, people do save here for a piece that lasts 2 generations, a piece of furniture. It's maybe not as beautiful as the Danish one, because visual quality and material quality maybe didn't come together. But when you tell the story and you raise the awareness that actually that is a shift, that is the way it is, mentality shift. I can think of like when a political body is not in favor of limiting the type of cars that go into the city center, is typically due to economic reasons. But when you show them the bigger picture of the economic impact of health over time, well, you're changing little by little the way of saying. And I feel like agents, like maybe the Design Museum in London is one of them, that translate that into something a little bit more palatable, can do that. And the way I see it now is Fundación RIE is kind of that here in Galicia, maybe, I don't know, but I feel like those kind of educational institutions can, and as an industrial designer, I've seen people asking more and more for sustainable products. They want those. And so it is a financial incentive to be able to offer those. It's just that a lot of people will not do it by default. They need to be shown very clearly with very good examples. But people are not.
It's a really good point, and actually something I should have said, because I think that's one of the things we can do as a museum. But if you do, we have done exhibitions around wastage. We looked at the culpability of design in fueling mass consumption, and then we looked at possible solutions, from waste product. And then we did the More Than Human show, which was about looking at it from a different perspective. But it's interesting, the audience figures for those shows are good, but not brilliant. So one of the things we do is, so when we do the shows I was talking about where you look at design, look at cultural phenomena through the framing of design. So there's a Wes Anderson show on at the moment. Film's really good. Tim Burton last year, Wes Anderson this year. Kind of 3 times previous records, But people who come to the museum to see Wes Anderson, who go to the top floor to get coffee or have lunch, see a rotating display of Future Observatory and documentation of this, which is down the road. And that seems to me the best way of doing it, rather than expecting people to come to the museum to be educated, that this is why they're going to come. You want them to come to see things that they know they're interested in, and then give them the chance to see things that they'd no idea about, or they didn't know they were interested in. And the response to that research on the top floor is really positive. But if that was all we were marketing, it wouldn't necessarily work. So that is definitely a positive way that a museum can start to contribute. So roughly 650,000 people last year would have seen design research for the green transition, whereas if we just put on a display of that, it would have been a relatively small number. But that's how you start to permeate people's different ways of thinking. And the other point, we mentioned Galicia, is how things are made and material transformation, and then by extension the transformative potential of design, is really, really powerful for people. People who come to museums, particularly design museums, we see more and more, they're fascinated by process. So the sketches of a filmmaker, how props are constructed, how scenes are made, how a chair is made. We know that people are interested in that. And this is a making culture in Galicia. And the more people are, I don't know, it's showcased, or the more people are aware of it, the more people start to understand the value of things that have been made by hand, why something is more sustainable, why something costs more, why something is better and worth more than something with built-in obsolescence and so on. So the education thing that I keep coming back to is to do with giving people a chance to see things or be aware of things. And if I could do more around making in the museum, I would. One of the problems the UK has is that our manufacturing, the Industrial Revolution 200 years ago, we were the manufacturing centre of the world. Now, virtually nothing is made in the UK. So the disconnect between British designers, who are often very, very good, world class, and things being made is often hundreds, thousands of miles away. Here, there's a closeness to that, which is something to be exploited or explored, I think.
And probably shop class is also gone from schools and these kind of things, right?
Yeah.
So my question is much more banal, because exactly what you said in a culture like Galicia, which is so much a making culture, and where there are extraordinary artisans with really extremely interesting skills and traditionally supported skills. How do you support these artisans to understand what design can be and what it shouldn't be, how it can enhance their making, rather than become something that you put on top of the making through a misguided idea of design?
I think we have to be a little bit careful about the idea of making in a contemporary condition, because a lot of things which are made are not particularly interesting to see them made. It's very interesting to see someone make a boat or a basket, but an aluminium window frame, just pushing bits of stuff. The bigger thing, yes, we went to see Percusa making leather sheets. The general thing is fascinating, and I have to say, it is extraordinary how many companies in the middle of the landscape are making significant, products distributed all over Europe. Leather, making bags, aluminium, steel frame, these things, windows. I'm not sure how easy it is to really enjoy them, because the industrial process has become, often you're making a piece of something. So you're not seeing a totality. So there is a limit.
Yeah, I'm not. Well, actually, you're a jaded architect. Seeing a window frame made would be fascinating for someone for the first time, maybe not for the 100th time. But I think this point about things made, you're right. The phone has, well, I know it's about 43 different component parts, different material parts to each phone. But there's Studio Drift in Amsterdam did an amazing ongoing series of artworks where they actually used an iPhone and they did a Beetle car, and they deconstruct these objects, and then they present in a kind of quasi-constructivist diagrammatic block form, so it looks like a sculpture, proportionate to the amount of different materials that are in the product. So there's a kind of diagrammatic graph. So you see the 43 different component parts. Now, actually, that's not seeing an iPhone made, but it's quite interesting to know that there are roughly the same number of different material parts to an iPhone as to a Beetle car from 30 years ago. So at least understanding what goes into the manufacture of something is part of that education. I'm not saying that everything has to be showcased as pure process, but we did a Barbie show recently, and Barbie as a design phenomenon, one of the most successful toys, and also Barbie as the way through which generations of children learnt about fashion or interiors and so on. We did it both ways. It was very popular, as you'd imagine. One of the most popular things in that show was some grain film footage we got from 1960-61 of the Japanese factory where Barbie mouldings were made. Now, who would have thought? You might have thought the 384 career manifestations Barbie had would be the most fascinating thing, or the fact that she'd been put as an astronaut up in space. But people gathered around. They wanted to see this thing being made.
So, just very briefly, is there a way by which that fascination might reorientate some of the things that we do? In other words, I mean, you got very romantic about the traditional ways of making fishing materials. If you walk along the coast at the moment, after the winter storms, you see the debris on the beach, which is, I would say, 70% of that plastic is from the fishing industry. So if there was legislation about the fact that we couldn't use plastics for fishing, you can't lay that on the fishermen, because it's difficult for them already to make a living. So you can't expect them to say, "Oh, isn't it a shame we use these objects?" But if they were supported that way, it would be very easy to come back to those things. And the same thing, we looked at the bar, again, in the Povero Gallego, it's fantastic. You see all the baskets and things like that. When you go to Abastos, you see vegetables in those old baskets. One of the reasons they still use those baskets is because they're very sensible, they're very practical, and they absorb the material very well. It would seem to me that in a time when we're getting upset about plastics and that the use of organic materials, and a lot of those things are still in play, it's very difficult for them to compete in a conventional way. But if the rules of the football game, the rules of the playing field changed, then, and there was an advantage to using non-plastic materials, to using organic materials, then I think some of those craft skills and things could come back into play in less of a sort of artistic craft protectionism thing, because we can't just keep making crafts into a sort of a regional industry. We can't just rest on this romantic idea of Galician baskets being sort of heritage. I mean, I think we've got to look forward, and think about how these natural products could play a much bigger part in a world which is now starting to reject plastic products.
Which is where the construction industry could be a major area of legislated experiment, because traditional materials, stone, wood, straw, mud, are much more sustainable and possible. We could build with those much more readily.
Well, Galicia, this is a fantastic prototype for Galicia. But you'd still, if I was a builder building one house and someone said, can you make it out of stone, or do you want to just make it how you normally do out of brick? That's the danger. But clearly, if there's encouragement to use stone, I would have thought that would work. Any more questions?
Hi, my name is Alba. I'm not a designer, but I'm a lawyer. So, in relation what you were saying, I completely agree. And I think that laws are always developing late, and reality is really going really fast. So that's the big issue, and also the influences of corporates. And well, we all know this kind of stuff. But my question is related to design, because I've made a research about protection of design and about protection of designs made with artificial intelligence. So I would like to bring this topic to this table and ask you about how do you think the artificial intelligence in the design, in the future design, is going to influence, and if the products will have any kind, well, the process of design will have any responsibility in the impact of the people that use these products, and also the impact in the sustainability process, because it's also more, well, the processes will make more pollution, and well, that's my question.
We do this project at the Design Museum called Design Ventura. So it's for school children between the ages of 14 to 16. And they can work in groups of between 2 and 5. It's nationwide, so 400 schools took part last year, so that's a tenth of all state schools. We exclude the private sector because they have too many resources, so it's a state sector focused project. And we do workshops in the museum, we do it online, and they have to learn how to design and make a product that can be made and sold in our shop for under £15. The money goes to charity, by the way, not to us. And then they learn collective working together, how ideas become material form, how you package, how you market, how you produce a product. And the winning entry 3 years ago was this lovely seed cannon. So it's a sort of cardboard cylinder filled with meadow seed that you go out into, I don't know, into a lawn or a park or your garden, and you open it and it fires seeds everywhere, and then they spray. It's a lovely idea. £5 ago. Anyway, the 5 children or young people who did that, one of the points about this is to try and pipeline talent to go into design and further education, because in the UK, the curriculum for art and design, particularly design and technology, is just being hammered. So this was a way forward. I'm getting to a point, by the way, on this. And I asked the 5 young people who'd won, I was just chatting to them afterwards, and said to them, so how many of you would think about a career in design now? And 3 of them said they would, which is pretty good. And the other 2 said, we want to be lawyers, but we can work in design because of patent law. So as you started speaking, I was thinking, good, you're one of those people who wants to protect. And then you talked about AI and the spectre of AI. It's trying to put water back into a bottle that's spilt everywhere. But funny you should ask about AI, because literally 10 minutes before we started to talk, I was sent an update from this robot called Ada that identifies as female and an artist. And we've done projects with Ada at the museum, more about the process of this AI algorithm programmed robot, whose art is so reassuringly crap, even though some of it's sold incredibly well. But hopefully that's a kind of post-Duchampian thing rather than people taking the objects seriously. But Ada has now moved into design. And the design that she's come up with for a kind of living pod really looks like something sort of post-Niemeyer produced in the 50s. It's profoundly unoriginal. And where it seems to me that AI may have some value or some use is if it's programmed in terms of what is the most sustainable way economically of building this structure, or how can a city or a place be designed more sustainably, and the algorithmical feeding of knowledge is pumped in. But the concern is it's just mass appropriation to produce very highly unoriginal designs. And it's something that is difficult to legislate, but I throw it back to you. How do you suggest we do it? It's a lawyer's problem, not a designer's problem.
Do you have an answer?
Well, what I work in my research was the topic of the author when the artificial intelligence picks a lot of designs of other people to make another one. So that's one of very other topics that we can analyze here. Personally, I think that it has to be a tool, and it's developing like really fast also, so we have to learn how to work with it, because if not, it's going to like develop more than we can manage. So I think it's important to talk about this and start to use and to also develop laws to regulate it, because
I think you're right, and thank you for having a go. It's a good answer. And I think that it is a tool, and that's how we should use it. But it's interesting because in this elegant exhibition that David and the team have staged here, you know, the cafetiere is really interesting downstairs, because your version of the coffee maker, is a beautifully tweaked evolution of the classic, maybe to make a new classic. And it's just improved, and you've acknowledged source, and you've put them together, and it's very clear when we look at it that you've managed, you know, the handles changed, the geometry's changed subtly, and it's better and it functions better. But you've acknowledged source. If AI did that, the question would be, what was being claimed? And that I mean, so there's a lot of overstatement about appropriation in AI, actually. I mean, art has spent, the history of Western art is one of reaction to or appropriation of ideas. But it's because of the commercial exploitation that people fear in AI that this happens. But you know, the idea of acknowledging sources it's time-honored, and it's something we should do. But anyway, I go back to the point. At the moment, the designs are not exciting and not original. It's more the area of practical information that AI may be able to assimilate and give us some options on that seems to be the area we should be using it in.
If every attempt to reassure ourselves about AI is based on the idea that it's a tool that could be used to our advantage. And the danger is, of course, we know this tool is not under control. Also, the real danger is, how is there so much money being invested? Why is the dimensions of finance to do with AI so gigantic? Because there's all of these people that want to make a better world. No, it's all these people that want to make some money, and they have this notion that within those things, and we've seen it in all of the virtual things, the way of earning money is exponential in the same way that the thing is itself. So if there was somehow the notion that this was being done for science, for, you know, I mean, we always had the idea that technology was going to help us. My worry is that while I do think this could be a useful tool, the scale of it has nothing to do with it being a tool. The scale of it is to do with its potential to earn money for a group of people. And secondly, the scale of it requires energy consumption, which is disproportionate to everything else. So you fiddle around with this. If you're, for instance, using AI to do it, the energy probably that is being expounded on the AI machinery is destroying the planet at the same time as we're trying to save it. I mean, there's probably, outside of the Middle East war, you know, AI is probably going to consume more energy than anything else we can possibly think of.
Well, I can reassure you we didn't use AI.
Absolutely. But I'm just saying, all of us, you know, we ourselves in the foundation, you know, we're scratching around trying to make some small mark in terms of making more intelligent decisions. And while we're, you know, trying to make small intelligent decisions, other people are making very large stupid decisions. That's a bit of a negative way to finish, but I think we have to put our trust in, as we do in the foundation, that there is an attitude within this community, I think, closer to realities than we are dealing with in many other places. As architects and designers, we're fascinated by the virtual world, but we still have an innate confidence in the physical world. I still have an innate confidence in making a coffee in the morning and sitting on a nice chair and opening a window and standing in a garden. I mean, these are the things which affect our lives. And I just have the feeling that in the world we're creating, we're forgetting, and we're trying to compensate for that, because it's a bit like sorry, I'm being very anecdotal, but the story of a guy on the beach fishing, and in, I don't know, he's Miami or somewhere, and some rich guy with a cigar comes up and says, "Why are you just fishing with a line? You need a net, and then, you know, you can catch more fish, and then you could get a boat, and then you could develop an industry, and you could catch more boats, more fish." And then what do I do? Well, then you can retire and you can sit on a beach and catch fish. And he said, yeah, exactly. And I have the feeling a little bit that in this community there's a bit more sensitivity to the idea that, you know, the things in front of us every day are where quality of life should be. But Tim, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for coming all this way.